Welcome everybody back to here at Veil of Sound. And no, you're not seeing double. It's not two same images of a bald guy with a beard and glasses. No, it's somebody else that a lot of you have looked at. I'm very sure. Even though you might not have the knowledge that you did it, but I'm very happy that Seldon-Hunt is with us. So first of all, Seldon, thanks for joining the show.
No, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure because I just told Seldon in our little pre-recording chat that over the last couple of days, I went through his body of work. And Seldon is one of the visual artists of the early 21st century. And I saw how many of his records, or not his records, but the records he designed, or for which he put the artwork onto pencil and paper, or however you did it. We'll come to that in a moment. How many of them I got. Seldon, you have to go through the first question that we usually always ask here at Veil of Sound is, what is the band merch that you are wearing today?
Oh, I think it's a Conan shirt.
Ooh.
Yes.
But not self-designed, right?
No. I've never done anything for Conan. I haven't. No, I bought this at a show last year, I believe,
okay,
here in Brooklyn. Mm-hmm.
So a band that you would still like to work with, or where you say like, oh, maybe not. However it comes.
If it came along, sure. I don't approach bands like I did when I was younger. If something happens, it happens.
Yeah.
But and obviously, you know, like you were saying in the intro, I'm very associated with, as you put it, the early 21st century, which sounds like such a long time ago. But there is a lot of truth to that, I think. My work isn't associated like it was with with scenes now as it was, you know, back then. So I'm the younger bands. I think a lot of younger bands, you know, either haven't probably heard of me even, or obviously are working with people of the equivalent of me, 20 years younger, you know, other people doing stuff. So that's how things.
Maybe this also helps to bring a younger generation to the awareness that you would still do stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, of course.
So for all the cool bands out there, if you're into sludge, doom, post-metal, whatever nearly, and if you want to have a really recognizable shirt, poster, cover design, whatever, call up this man. He's a really talented guy, because you have worked with like basically the who is who of the last 35 years of underground. Let's say like especially 1990, or like in the middle of the 90s till the middle of the 10s, right?
Early 10s, I would say. Yeah.
We have like Boris, we have Natya, we have The Ocean, we have ISIS, we have Neurosis, so all the great ones. And I know that I've forgotten tons of other bands that are big and important. The Melvins, Ween, I mean, like, oh my God. So, you know, you said you were associated with scenes, but was it really one scene?
I think it feels like it. I mean, looking back on it, I think there was in the early 2000s when I think bands like ISIS and Sun and High on Fire sort of became into prominence. I think those bands, for even though they were in different, you know, genres, if you like, I think they formed like a bit of a resurgence of stuff post 90s, the post grunge, and also in some ways there was I feel like it was maybe a reformation of the rock and metal new way of looking things post the techno explosion of the 90s as well, which had attracted a lot of younger people. So I think even though those bands were all quite different, I think they did sort of gel together something new for sure.
Yeah. I think there is something, and I recall that from an article in a German magazine like 15, 16 years ago, where they were talking about sludge metal. and their definition was so broad that they could put nearly everything from Church of Misery till Baroness into the same genre. But one thing that they said, and I think that is true, and that might also be like a link for all the artists that you work with, that a certain level of distortion was key for a lot of them, wasn't it?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, there was, and also just distorted bass. I think a lot of the music was obviously quite heavy, as they say. So I think that was definitely probably a key factor, and I think it was just also like there was a recognition, I think, of being fairly, there was experimental, and there was a touch of the avant-garde to a lot of things. I mean, even if you look at, I mean, Old Man Gloom and Lotus Eaters and that kind of thing. I mean, it was experimental, you know, but it was connected still through to AC/DC and Black Sabbath and, you know, really just rock and metal, but just playing around with that, with those forms. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I think just what you said, like there was a certain openness, right? And that is also something that I think is reflected in your work, because I looked up a lot of posters, and after like, I don't know how many, dozens, I think I went 5, 6 dozen posters that I looked at. I think it's hard to come up with a definition of a certain Seldon-Hunt-style. Would you agree with that?
Yes. When I was more prolific back in those days, you know, when bands would approach me to do work, I would have to ask them for reference, like, which style do you want me to do? Because I had a few. I'd ended up, I mean, it wasn't because that wasn't on purpose. I just never, especially back then, I never imagined that things would progress the way they did. And I didn't, I mean, especially when I started working out with, you know, working with bands like Sun and Isis and so forth, you know, they weren't very popular even really in the underground at that stage. And they were just starting out to a certain, they'd been around for a couple of years. So I never imagined things would explode. So I wasn't even conscious of my own style. And a lot of the work that I did, I mean, I developed those styles while doing the work with those bands. I hadn't done that sort of work beforehand. I didn't come out of art school with a particular way of doing things at all. And a lot of the work that I did was developed in response to the music and the sound and the emotion of the music, and so that would dictate a direction that I took. And I experimented with, you know, whether it was screen printing or digital or hand drawn or or collage or whatever, just whatever suited the release or the, you know, the sound of the band. So, but in time, I developed those styles, and I found that I wanted to work within, I guess there was like maybe even 4 or 5 different ways of doing things. So, yeah.
Well, it also struck me that for a lot of the sludge bands, post-metal, however you want to call it, for all the bands somewhere between Neurosis and Isis, I think I saw that, you know, the distortion that you played with, and also the distortion of the bass, for a lot of these bands, you had something that I would say a very clear chaos. A lot of long stretched lines, a lot of recurring little dots and pieces here and there, very often very symmetrical in a way. So that is something that struck me. Was that also something where bands at a point approached you and said like, oh, I would like you to, or we would like you to do something like the Neurosis cover for A Sun That Never Sets, or for like something that, some tour poster that you did for Isis or something?
Yeah, I think the tour posters that I did for Isis were definitely impactful on younger bands coming up through the scene. Ironically enough, even though I think that the Neurosis album was probably the you know, the biggest album, if you like, that I designed, especially, and probably still is. Weirdly, that didn't have as much as an impact, pardon me, on lots of bands wanting a cover like that. It was a fairly unique cover, but it did attract the attention of a few musicians, like, but not a lot. But they didn't necessarily want something like that. But it was more like, wow, this is really interesting. Would you want to do something for us? I didn't necessarily do something like the Neurosis cover, though, as a response, because it didn't suit what they were doing. But it suited. Well, I mean, when I did the Neurosis cover, I mean, I hadn't heard the album or anything. And Steve approached me because I'd showed him work like that. I met up with Steve until in Oakland in 2000 in person. And, you know, I had some prints with me that I'd done, which were of a similar style, like a lot of chaos and dense line work. And I would just I was just meeting him as an artist. I had no pretensions that I'd be doing a Neurosis album cover by any means. It was just really just through Aaron Turner, who contacted him and said, hey, this weird Australian's coming over there from Boston. You guys should hang out for a night. And so we, you know, it was back in the early days of email, and we exchanged a few, and I caught up with him, went to his house, and we talked about all sorts of stuff. You know what Steve's like. And yeah, he just really liked the work. And I guess like 18 months later, you know, he emailed me and said, hey, you know, do you want to do the Neurosis cover? And I was like, sure, that sounds awesome. And I guess just because I'd only showed him that work, I hadn't showed him really anything else I'd done. And also, I mean, to be honest, that was really the only style of work I had back then. But I hadn't really used it much, except for a couple of KK Null solo releases and something from Mick Harris. And so it was like, yeah, of course I'm going to do it. He's contacted me because of those prints, so I'm not going to do something different. You know, that's what he wants. So we just worked around the concept of the album as far as, you know, what might be visually wanted a sun, and, you know, and that's how that happened. Yeah.
For everybody who's asking, the record that we are referring to is A Sun That Never Sets. 2001, 2002, something like that.
It was around then. Yeah, I can't remember the exact year. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those Neurosis covers that everybody recognizes.
Yeah, it's very different.
That is something that struck me with a lot of your covers. You automatically recognize them, even though, and just like you said, even though they're not one of the same style. It's not as if you're like Kozik, where everybody sees, okay, that's a Kozik. Yeah, that is something that is striking in your body of work. Do you think that because of that lack of unified identity, you might not be as recognizable or might not be as popular as other visual artists?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's played a part in it. I think when you have a very identifiable style, for whatever reason it may be, it makes you very identifiable. And I think obviously I mean, I think one of the things possibly is, I mean, I'm not meant to speak out of turn, but I think a lot of the artists, you know, I think they were illustrators, and, you know, they illustrated in a certain style, and that's what they did. I mean, that's what they studied, and that's what they ended up doing. Whereas I studied graphic design at college, and I took it very seriously, and I didn't see myself as an illustrator at all. Like, that was not something I did. I was a designer, you know, it was all about, you know, I wasn't really into experimental graphic design, and, you know, I was really influenced by, you know, contemporary sort of design firms of the 90s. And I think in some way, like in terms of graphic design, I mean, you approach a project based on the client and their needs, and you respond. And when it came to music, even though it's a lot more abstract, it was more like I approached each project with the same mentality of like, how can I make this unique? noticeable and interesting and reflect the music, rather than being in a situation where I illustrated in a certain style and then use that style to respond in a similar way. Like, how do I represent my illustration with the music and what the client wants? But I think that made me do things in all sorts of different ways, like a graphic designer. And I think as time progressed, by probably 2008, I was definitely an illustrator. Yeah.
So you said, like, you started as a graphic designer, saw yourself as one. At some point 10 years later, you're an illustrator. How do you see yourself now, 2024?
I would see myself as an illustrator more than a designer these days. Yeah. And I think when I do get asked to do things, it's often based on illustration. But obviously, like I did a lot of photography work. So we're purely photographic covers. And I think also, like, there were many releases that were, that were through like Southern Lord and other related labels. And I'd obviously work with Stephen O'Malley a lot back then, and with the Southern Lord stuff, and he was art directing, and he'd say, hey, can you take a photo for this album cover, and so on and so forth. So I ended up doing a lot of photography. They've got, once again, that was another style, if you like, of Seldon's work, was the photography. So yeah, so I was being more a designer, but I think by 2008 or so, it had become very much illustration, for various reasons. Like, even when I started out doing the ISIS posters in the early 2000s, for example, like, I'd never done tour posters before. And so, like, I had to screen print them. So I had to figure out, like, well, I can't screen print the sort of Neurosis style, because that's literally impossible, with the limitations of screen printing, unless you've got a load of money. And so I used collage. So before I studied graphic design, I was a biology student at university, and I just went out to the university I'd gone to in the 80s, because I knew where all the reference books were still. And I just photocopied tons of pages of weird creatures and, microbiological, bacteria and so forth. And I used those to construct, my tour posters, because I'd never drawn before. I'd never done any drawing, really. So I guess by 2008, like, I realized that, like, I saw a lot of work by people like Arik Roper and I can't even think of anyone off the top of my head, Florian Bertmer and those guys. And there's someone else I'm missing, but I can't remember them. But I just realized that drawing was important, like that hand drawn. I really liked how they just created very unique pieces of artwork by hand. And I saw that as a challenge that I wanted to take on. So, and I used that with T-shirts a lot. So I started teaching myself to draw with pen and ink. And so that's how I sort of became an illustrator. So I didn't really start drawing until I was like 38 years old.
When you describe that process of working with photography, there was immediately one record coming to my mind, and that was Pelican's What We All Come to Need. I guess that is based on a picture that you took, and then you work with it, right?
Which one's that? I can't even remember it.
Oh, that's the one with which basically is in all different shades of red, and it looks like you photographed the sea or a lake or something like that. With a few
that one. Actually, I didn't take that photo.
Okay.
That was one of the Southern Lord projects. I art directed, and I put I used the photo. I can't remember who took the photos. Forgive me, whoever, if you're watching this. But no, I sent the photos by Greg from Southern Lord, and he said, "Can you do something with these photos for the Pelican release?" So yeah, I think I ended up flipping them and joining them together and coloring them and all that sort of stuff. But the original photos were someone else's photos. Yeah.
But that's what I said. Like, you take a photo and then you work with it, right? You twist
Oh
it, you turn
yeah,
it.
yeah.
And of course, you change the colors and everything like that, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I'd often layer photos a little bit just subtly to sort of, give them an unusual abstraction a lot of the
Hmm.
time because,
Hmm.
I mean, especially when I moved to New York, like I was limited in terms of location because I didn't have a car. Um, and so, I'd go to the park or I'd go to wherever I may be and sort of it would give the impression that the photo was taken somewhere else and, depending on how I treated it, like the photo that was on the cover of Earth's Hibernaculum release, which Stephen art directed. But a lot of people would say, "Oh, did you go down to Appalachia for the photo? Because it has that sort of,
Hmm.
autumnal,
Yeah.
vista, and it looks very natural." No, it was taken in Prospect Park, like 5 minutes from my house in Brooklyn. But I would just, I guess, use the illusion of framing and coloring in Photoshop to sort of create that impression that it was, somewhere else, for
That
sure.
is like really interesting when you talk about that. And you've also just mentioned Earth's Hibernaculum. You were the guy who made that movie, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
And now, I mean, like I can see how that came into fruition, like knowing people and stuff. But correct me if I'm wrong, but it's the only longer piece of film that you ever directed or made, right?
Yes, that is correct. It's the only one that was released.
Okay.
I did film and make a movie of an ISIS tour in
Mhm.
2005. Um,
So
but
that was a tour that was one of the last shows that I've seen by them. Yes, cool.
right. And so yeah, I made a tour documentary about that tour. But for various reasons, the band didn't want to release it. I mean, it was never taken to the point where it was like a devastating decision. Like I filmed it, and I worked with my friend Heath who edited it, and we got it to a point where it was like, well, this is kind of what we think would work. Like it was like 90 minutes long.
Mm.
It was like a 7 or 8 week tour, so it was a long video. Um, but yeah, I just didn't. I think in some ways, I think Aaron might have thought it didn't fit into the aesthetic of ISIS and where it sat, and maybe it was a little too revealing because I think in some ways, there's a bit of mystique, about the band in some way, which is fair enough. Because obviously a tour documentary, it can have an intimacy to it it can be confronting, and especially fans. It's not part of their presentation,
It takes
that
some of the
makes sense.
mystique away, right?
Yeah, and also just in terms of their humility and so forth, I think there was an aspect to that. So yeah, that made sense. That movie still exists, but it's just on a DVD somewhere. And I also shot, but I've never put anything together. I shot a Sun tour when they're in 2006, a European tour.
Mm.
And that's for similar reasons we decided not to even progress with editing it. But that was the tour that I shot the Earth footage as well, because Earth were on that tour.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was the co-headlining gig, right? That they had.
Yeah, yeah. So I shot a Sun documentary at the same time, but
Mm.
yeah, there were just a lot of reasons we decided not to proceed with it. So
So how was that for you? Like, okay, you say 2005, 2006, you were into, let's say, at least shooting film and footage, and then you of course it took some time to get Hibernaculum together. But first of all, how long did it take? How did you decide, or how did you decide on which footage to use? Like, did you do that all on your own, or were you in
no,
constant contact with Dylan?
no, I mean Dylan had really nothing to do with it until the end. It was really just I worked with an editor in Australia because he was the only editor I knew, and I'd worked with him on the doing the ISIS one originally because I'd worked on that with him in Australia. It was before I moved to New York. And we just had phone calls and emails, and we put that all together, virtually basically. And same sort of thing with and that's how it happened with Dylan. We just sort of put something together and sent it to Greg, because he wanted to release something possibly on Southern Lord as a DVD. And so, we showed him that, and he was like, yeah, can you cut this out and this out? And Dylan didn't like a few things that he just wanted to, have left out of it, which is normal. And then it was done, yeah. And then we just had Randall done, just sort of remix the sound because it was shot without a proper external mic. It was just an in-camera mic. And so, yeah, that's how that came about.
And how long did it take all in all? How long did it take you to
It's a
get kind of
while
an excellent
ago. I
movie?
think it probably took like 3 months, I think. It wasn't too long. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, what is it, 70 minutes, something like that?
Yeah, I mean, and it wasn't that difficult in some respects because, we wanted to make it an ambient movie. It doesn't have a narrator or anything like that. So it was more like it was like an art film in the sense that it just showed it just was the sound and the people, and it's like a silent movie with music and texture, basically.
Yeah, that's true. The only thing that is lacking in order for it to be a silent movie would be those text panels in the middle. Right?
Yeah, right, exactly.
When you set out to do something like that, did you have certain people in mind whose documentaries you might have watched before, or was it all autonomous?
It was autonomous. I think for me also because, when when I was asked to come along on those tours to film them, and it's nice, I was just on the Khanate tour in Europe, and it was exactly the same situation. It's more like you want to come along and document it, and we'll see what happens at the end. Like, we'll see what the footage is. We'll see if there's something that can come out of it. Because I didn't come up with, especially with those guys, like back with Earth, there wasn't really like I have a concept in mind and I need to film the following stuff to make it happen, because it's just me. And there's no crew, there's no sound guy. And really, to be honest, I mean, I was asked to come along on those tours to document also just because I was friends with the band. I mean, I'm obviously such a great guy to have around. I was asked to go along and and just hang out more than anything. And so, me being sort of always very proactive, especially back then, was like, well, I'll shoot something and maybe we can make a movie out of it. That was really where the idea of the project started and began. So.
You have mentioned, for example, the European tour with ISIS back in 2005. That was when you were still living in Australia.
Correct.
And in 2006, something like that, 2006, 2007, I think you moved to New York. Do you see a change in your work? Or did you notice a change?
I think so. I mean, when I moved to New York, it obviously it opened up an enormous number of doors, because there's a big difference between living in Melbourne in Australia and living in the epicenter of everything. So, I mean, I was relying on word of mouth and just the reputation of the work itself being noticed, online or in record stores, for things to happen for me. But when I came to New York, I'd go to a show, and so when I moved here, Stephen was still living here, and like he was obviously knew a lot of stuff going on, so he'd invite me out like every 2 nights basically to go to an exhibition opening or a show or some concert or whatever. And because he's such a personable person, and he knew a lot of people, and I was introduced to a lot of people through him, and then they would start asking me to go to shows, and just it was very, very sociable in a professional sense. So obviously when I'm at the show, it's like, oh, you're the guy that did the Neurosis cover, cool, and then I'd get an email from them the next day, like, oh, I got your email from so and so, do you want to do this album cover? And that was not happening in Australia at all. Like in Australia, I was anonymous. Like, there was only one band that knew who I was in Australia. Like, no one cared at all what I was doing. And it was very frustrating for me to sort of have this sort of growing reputation over in the States and in Europe, and then to be in my own city to be just like, no, people still wanted, cartoon album covers and that sort of that aesthetic. No one really cared about doing something with a bit of gravitas for their album cover, aside from one band, White Horse, who I got to know at their first ever show. And the guy that was the vocalist in the band worked at a record store that I used to frequent all the time. And I had actually just gone, he didn't know me. He'd seen me coming to the store a lot of times. And, but I went into the city to pick up the Neurosis albums that I'd designed because Steve sent me some samples in the mail. And I had to pick them up at the post office because there'd been a problem with customs for some reason. And so I picked them up and then went to Missing Link Records afterwards to sort of see if there was anything I wanted to sort of check out. And went up to the counter and I had the Neurosis things in my hand. And he's gone, "Hey, excuse me, that's a Neurosis. Oh, what's that?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, that's the new album. Who are you?" It was very funny.
How come you have this already?
Yeah, why do you have this? We haven't even seen it. And I explained what was going on and so on. And we're still very good friends. That's kind of how we met. And I ended up doing some work with his band. He was the only person that showed any interest and in my work in Australia. Yeah. But that changed when I came to New York. It was just Americans are a lot different to Australians. Australians are very guarded about helping people. We call it tall poppy syndrome, which is like if you start getting a little bit of success, like people don't want to talk to you, and you play this weird game. And I'm not very good at that. And I just found when I moved to New York, like people are just so enthusiastic about what you do. "Oh, you're Seldon. Oh, that's fantastic. We love what you do. You should do some this. Oh, I know some people. I'll give you my number. You call them." Like, it was overwhelming. It was fantastic. I mean, that's why I'm still here. I like Americans,
Yeah, I guess it suits you more then.
Yeah, it does.
You've just mentioned, going to record stores and to shows, and is that something that you still do a lot? Or
No.
are you also one of those guys who, if anything new comes up, gets it online?
I tend to. I rarely go to shows these days for a number of reasons. I mean, I have a full-time job now, so I don't want to go out during the week. I don't have the energy. I can't get up early after a late night like I used to. That's one reason. And also I just feel like unless it's something I really want to see, I think part of going to shows for a long time, there was obviously a strong social factor to it. So I'd go to shows and I knew a lot of people in the audience and, because the scene was happening in New York, but that's all gone. So if I go to it, let's like say the Conan show where I'm wearing the shirt, where I bought the shirt, like I didn't know anyone there. I went with a friend, but like I didn't know anybody else there. Whereas I used to go to a show and it'd be like, "Hey, what have you been up to?" Like there'd be a lot of people there. So, and that was part of the attraction to going. It was like going to the local pub was to go to see a band play. But things are different. It's a different group of people, and that stops me going to shows as well. And also, I just can't. Once it gets to 11 o'clock now, I'm like, really? We still got to wait around for the band? Like I just lost my patience.
Oh, an encore? Really? Do you have to? Come on. Really?
I know. I just wish the main act had come on first.
Yeah, then the co-headlining tours are the best ones, right? You have spoken about like 30 years in the business. And you've spoken about your deep friendship to Stephen and of course other people. Are there did you make a lot of friends that you're still in touch with? Stephen, Aaron?
I'm not in touch with Aaron anymore.
Yeah,
it's not that we're not friends, but he's become I think he's more reclusive than he was.
If you live in Puget Sound, it's hard to come to New York.
Right. Yeah. And also just, I mean, often quite unaware of what's going on these days. So like I'll see something on Facebook photos, it'll say Old Man Gloom played in Brooklyn and last night it was awesome, and I'm like, dang shit, I would have loved to have gone down and said hello to Aaron. But it's as much as my fault as anything. Stephen and I are still very close. We text all the time and whatever, and we hang out whenever he comes to town. And if I go over to Europe, I always try to catch up with him. But yeah, I feel like I had way more of a friend group within the music scene for a long time than I do now. And I think it's got a lot of bands have stopped playing, like that I've worked with. I mean, a lot of them have just gone on to other things or they're doing whatever. And so there's that, and that causes you to sort of lose touch a bit because that reason for you to have those communications is dissolved. And life just goes on. You start doing other things and you make other friends. And if you're not as
for a brewery,
or whatever. I worked as a bartender for a long time in the 2010s, and a lot of my friendship group became people within that sort of industry. But I think it's just got a lot to do with a lot of people stopped going to shows that I knew that were in bands because a lot of people just get a bit older and they move out of New York, they buy a house in Pennsylvania or whatever, and all of a sudden they don't live in New York anymore. So I think that happens too.
So let's have a short look at, I don't want to say negative, but we all know that we all sometimes do stuff for various reasons, and a year later or sometime later we look back on it and we're like, was it really necessary? Without necessarily mentioning a record or a product or a label or whatever, have there ever been moments when you looked back at something and you were like, shit, I should not have taken that job? For maybe you can explain the reason without explaining what it was.
That's an interesting question. I'm just trying to think of something. I don't think there's anything specific like that. I think I reached a point where I felt starting to feel a little bitter about things, in terms of just not being able to make a really good living from what I was doing, because there's only so much you can charge independent bands for things. I mean, it's just the nature of economics. And it gets annoying because you don't feel a sense of progression. Like you're still trying, you're still just living month to month almost financially, and you're so involved in something and you're getting older, and it started getting to me a bit. And I just started feeling a bit sort of like a factory line, and I started treating it a little like that, especially with smaller bands where I was just, I'd do a symmetrical image and just bang it out, because it's like I'm getting my fee and I don't want to spend any more time on it. I just want to go on to the next one. And I think I regret doing that a bit, and that was only for probably a couple of years more towards the end. But I think my attitude got a little dark. Yeah, definitely.
I ask that because I found something online where I was really surprised, and I would like to have your take on that.
Sure.
I think 18 or 19 years later. I don't know how it came, but Camel cigarettes.
Oh, right.
Made packages, or had packages designed by, it seems as if it were like Australian only designers. And one of them was Seldon-Hunt.
Yeah, that was an American thing.
Okay, so how do you now feel about that 20 years later?
Oh, I mean, I know what you're getting at, but at the time, I just moved to New York when I received the offer for that project, and I needed money for lawyers to get a green card at the time. And it was a huge issue for me because it's quite expensive, it's thousands and thousands of dollars. And that came in, and I was just like, oh, cool. Thank God for that. Like, that'll pay for it for the lawyer. Like, that saved my bacon. I mean, that made that project, although it was for, big tobacco, really, I was very, I'm not sure I would have been able to move to the US without it in some ways. Like, I wasn't a wealthy person, and I pretty much spent most of my money sort of, coming here. So that was a pivotal moment. And no work came out of it. It wasn't like I mean, I wish it had, but like it didn't do anything as I thought it might do. Having that pack of cigarettes. But I don't hide the fact that I did it. I mean, I put it up my website and so on and so forth. And it's a fair question, but no one's ever asked me about it before, which has often surprised me, actually. Like, there was no sort of like, oh, you Seldon-Hunted big tobacco. And it's like, oh.
No, I just saw that. I saw that on your Insta, actually. And I was like, I got to ask about that.
Yeah, no,
that is, and I also have to say, the packaging that you did itself is a cool thing. I was just like, okay, that's not a sellout, but it's a strange thing.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that that made it easy to make that decision to go down that path, because I mean, don't get me wrong, when I still saw it, I was like, oh, it would be tobacco, wouldn't it? Like, it was because the money was nice. It was going to, I was like, oh wow, it was more than I ever got paid before.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, does it have to be tobacco? That was kind of, I mean, I did have that reaction, but there was no way I wasn't going to do it. Like, I was like, I'm doing it for sure, because there were a lot of other, I can't remember what, they were doing this whole artist series, and
I looked it up. We're like quite a lot of them, actually.
A lot of them, yeah. And there was a very famous tattoo artist that they were using to do the main, like all the billboards and the main adverts. I can't remember who he was. He was a New Yorker as well. But there were a lot of people that I thought were interesting artists that were doing it. So I was like, okay, it's not like I'm just going straight in and out of the blue. It seemed to be, not that it had some sort of legitimate cachet or anything, and it wasn't diluted. It was still big tobacco, but I was joining other people that I respected in terms of artists. So if you said to me, would I have done that if I was living in Australia and I didn't need the money? That's a different question. Because that influenced my decision to do it, even though it was tobacco. Was that and it wasn't like, oh, I need money because I'm in trouble. It was just like, can't live in New York unless I can pay this lawyer. So it was useful. But honestly, I can't answer that question. I think I probably would have. I mean, I might want asking myself a question, but I probably still would have done it, to be honest.
And there is also something that I, scrolling through all the stuff that I found, and I hope I got it right. There is a record by a band called Sweet Apple.
Oh, yeah.
And the record was called Love and Desperation. And correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't that basically a cover of Roxy Music's Country Life?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny you should say that, because when it happened, people were like, "Oh, you ripped off that cover," but the idea was it was the band's.
Rancid did it with Minor Flag. Come on,
right?
Happens.
But it was an homage. I mean, there was no. We weren't trying. No one was trying to deceive anyone. It was a humorous kind of remake of that album. That's what Sweet Apple wanted to do. They wanted to have the Roxy Music cover, but their own version of it as a joke. But I think some people, because just saw it as, that's the Roxy Music cover. Like, why'd you recreate it? And it's like, I think the joke didn't work.
Yeah, come on, but it's still a cool thing. I mean, like, I looked at it and I was like, oh, it reminds me of something. And then I went through my mental cover library, and I thought, first thing that I had in mind was Brian Eno. And I mean, like, of course it is Brian Eno, but like, Then I was like, ah, man, I've seen that somewhere. And yeah, it was
Yeah,
recommended.
yeah, yeah. That
And
was totally on
to be
purpose.
clear, lots of people have done that. I mean, like Ween have done it with covering Leonard Cohen. Um, so it's nothing unusual. As I said, Rancid did it with Minor Threat, and so I always think it's a cool thing.
I
But that
think
is
if I
the
look back on
only.
that, I think if I was to look back on that, I think that, and I think probably the other people involved in that project would probably agree with me, is I think in some ways we didn't think enough about how we could do something conceptually with that idea in a way that was more clever and didn't just purely reference it, because the intentions I think were really good. And we just, just with budgets and time, we just got everything together. And my friend Jimmy Hubbard took the photo, and we did the photo shoot at the Guitar World Studios, and um, we had to get the models together and all that sort of stuff. And like having the time to sort of like, well, what could we do to make it like the concept work by referencing that particular cover? And I don't think we did that successfully. And I think everyone would probably like to have. It was because it was a cool idea, and I think we might have liked to have done it a bit differently. Because I've had a few people say that in the past to me, like as if it's like you just copied it, sort of thing.
Copied sounds too negative to me. I mean, like as I said, to me, such references are a cool thing. I look at that more from a positive point of view.
Yeah, well, people have a tendency to be negative, so
yeah, but that's like, is the glass half full, is it half empty?
exactly.
So you have worked with a lot of bands and a lot of labels. I mean, like apart, of course, from the Sun collaboration or also the Canate collaborations. Which ones are like the pleasurable ones, the ones where you say like, okay, if I got a call from this person or that person, that was always something that I enjoyed doing?
That's
And
good
let's
question.
stick to labels, because I think bands is like.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, my silence is my thinking.
Yeah, I figured that you didn't have a heart attack.
uh, it's hard to say. I mean, there was always problems when you're working, so there was never anything that was that pleasurable that it was
Mm-hmm.
like memorable. Um, I did a lot of work for Southern Lord at the time, and that wasn't always awesome, because Greg's a pretty full-on businessman and he'd have strong opinions about things. But I always enjoyed the collaborative process with Greg, as far as getting these, because they were great bands that he was releasing. So when Greg would email me and say, hey, like a lot of the, and sometimes with that stuff, I wasn't even really, I was just compiling it, and like you say with the Pelican, using imagery that I was given to do something with. So I think with the Southern Lord stuff, I enjoyed working with Greg, as far as like creating this catalog of interesting work. So at the time, I enjoyed contributing to that, and Greg was very supportive of everything I did, and I enjoyed that for sure. So I mean, yeah, I think if I was going to say anything, it would probably end up being Southern Lord for that, and for those reasons. Yeah.
I mean, like we have already mentioned that at the moment you're doing less visual work, less design work. But if you could choose one or two artists at the moment, or any, like living or dead, whatever, are there like one or two where you say like, oh, I would like, or I would have liked to work with them?
Oh, bands? Yeah. Oh. At the time, I think when they were still around, I always wanted to do my own take on the Motorhead symbol
Mm-hmm.
in the
Yeah.
Neurosis, maybe Sun-O style, like a really complex psychedelic kind of version. I always thought that'd be fun, and plus it's Motorhead. Um, But no, not really. There was nothing that. Oh, I guess I always liked the idea of working with Meshuggah because I felt like their complexity worked well
Yeah,
with maybe my style, and I enjoyed stuff, especially back in the day. Less so now, but like I enjoyed Meshuggah a lot, and I thought their music would, or my art would suit their music for sure. Um, but that's probably the main one. Yeah.
Didn't you work with one of the Meshuggah guys a few years back on a release, or is that just my bad research?
No, I have not worked with anyone from
Ah,
Meshuggah as far as I can remember.
so all the sweets out there, like if you listen to this, give that man a call. And one last thing before we come to the infamous quickfire round at the end of every Veil of Sound interview. You have mentioned going on tour, and you have mentioned, all the stuff that you did with ISIS and with Sun and also Earth. You have been on tour with Canate this spring.
Yep.
Apart, of course, from you being one of those pleasurable guys, and that's not what I wanted to ask. How did it feel to do one of those? I mean, like, of course, Canate did, like 3 or 4 shows here in Europe.
Yeah.
So it's a short run. But how did it feel to do that again after several years?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I enjoyed it, but I was also very glad it wasn't 7 weeks. I think my tolerance for that kind of lifestyle different now. But I mean, I enjoyed it because I'd never seen Khanate live myself because they stopped playing, in 2006 or whatever when I came over, and it was just soon after I arrived. I was like, really? Thanks. So it was great for me because I got to see them rehearse, and in the practice space, and then in a venue to get the live sound right, and then of course the 3 shows. So I had 5 concerts that I got to experience, and
And the whole festival.
yeah. So I got to feel a full sonic assault of it, especially in the practice space. I think my brain's still recovering from that. So yeah, and that was great. I mean, and I, like, they're definitely a band where I've uh, probably more so than even with ISIS or Sun, where I'm actually, I'm friends with all 4 of them. So I was very familiar with everybody, and it was a lot more relaxed, I think, in some ways, because I wasn't so conscious of being an outsider, like, oh, like, I'm not the musician, I don't want to get in the way, I don't want to be a dickhead, I don't want to be like someone that's like, oh, what did we invite this guy for, so I didn't have that feeling when I was with Khanate, because it was nice to hang out with everybody, and I hadn't seen Jim for a long time, but after 5 minutes, it was just like we'd been hanging out a lot like we used to when he was living in Jersey, and so yeah, I really enjoyed it. But as far as the lifestyle, like, yeah, I think I'm, after living alone now for quite a few years in New York, being in a space where you get very little time alone, I really noticed that really quickly. So, but it was fun. Yeah.
If anybody asks who he's talking about when he says Jim, it's James Plotkin. Maybe the mastering genius in the last
exactly
20-some years.
Yeah.
And you did something that I've seen you also do last year. You are now at a point where you get into, I don't want to say debates, but let's say talks about music. You've done a panel at Roadburn with Canate. You've done a talk last year in France on art and artwork.
Yeah.
Is that something where you say, like, okay, here all my experience and all the things that I've done come in handy?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't really have too much of a problem, discussing certain, like, that aspect of my life. Yeah, I mean, it's easy. There's a lot happened, and I find that the only thing that's difficult is trying to remember things.
Yeah, and here we can connect to the pre-recording chat that we had. You said that you have not got all the files from, or all the images from your artwork. So let's put it out like this. Is there a certain period of your body of work where you say like, oh, I missed something about that? So that maybe people who are listening to this and say like, okay, I could do a high-res scan of this. Could they get it to you?
Maybe. I mean, I had a computer crash that was that followed a external hard drive crash by like a week. So I think I lost everything I'd done in between like 2009 and 2011, pretty much. It all just gone. And I think just a lot of the stuff that I had done in Australia, because pre-2006, because I wasn't very good at backing stuff up, and I ended up leaving in a hurry. And I know my computer's still there. I have friends that have been very, very generous now, considering it's like 18 years. Thanks, Dale and Heath, for looking after my stuff as much as they can. So there's probably work from pre-2006 that I can probably access, but I don't have it here in New York. But that period when I lost the hard drive, I lost some stuff. Yeah.
So that's basically a lot of the HydraHead stuff that you have on computer back in Australia, but don't worry.
Yeah. I don't know if it's still there or not, but yeah.
So folks, if you have a really good scanner, and if you have some time, this man would be highly appreciative of it, I guess. So Seldon, first of all, thanks for all the really interesting talks, for all the insight. But nobody leaves a Veil of Sound interview without having to go through the infamous quickfire round at the end. You will always get two alternatives and have to choose from them. And most of them are on bands you have worked with. Also for the people out there to see how influential Seldon's work has been. Let's start off with something easy. I know that you like the Melvins, but which record would you choose? Stoner Witch or Houdini?
Houdini.
Interesting. You're one of the first to choose that one. Can you give a short explanation? And that's just for all the other questions as well, then.
I don't really have a reason. I just like that album. I mean, the Melvins, they're hit and miss for me sometimes, but they're not one of my favorite bands by any means. Because
which is also difficult, I think, because of that large body of work. It's difficult to like.
Of course, yeah. They're an amazing band. I mean, they're incredible. But I just like Houdini. I don't know why. It's just one of those It's just one of those albums that it's probably one of the few albums in the Melvins I'll play while I'm working, and so on and so forth.
You have worked with one of my all-time favorite bands on a split record, The Ocean. I think it was The Ocean and Burst, if I remember correctly.
I remember that, yeah.
I hope I give you two records that you are familiar with. My favorite one is Precambrian. And the other one that a lot of people always refer to when they talk about The Ocean is Pelagial. So you get to choose. And only based on the music, because I think you did the cover or like artwork for Pelagial. So let's just judge the music on this one.
I think I like Precambrian myself. Yeah. I think it was just I just find it I don't know, it's less clean in some way. I think it's a bit more earthiness to it. Yeah.
And I also like the amazing cast that they had on that one. That would always be my choice for The Ocean. I like basically nearly everything that they have done, or yes, everything. But that record is like, I would say, one of my top 10 island records.
Yep.
As you've worked with Earth, let's go to that band. And which of their records would you prefer to listen to right now? Earth 2 or bees that made, you know what I'm referring to. You know which one.
Yeah. Earth 2 every time.
That was a game breaker, wasn't it? Like a game changer.
Yeah. But my favorite record of theirs is Hex.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
It's a little less drony. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I love the atmosphere of that record though. I mean, it's
Mm-hmm.
definitely a little outside their oeuvre, if you like. But I remember when I heard that, I don't know, it's like a soundtrack to a movie I wish someone would make.
You could do that.
Maybe I should have. Yeah.
Let's go to ISIS. We'll now go to ISIS and Sun. I can already say that. Whenever anybody asks me about ISIS, there are just two records that are better than everything they have ever put out, although their body of work is flawless. But Panopticon and Oceanic, which one? Those are like, for me, like the ISIS albums.
Yeah.
If you had to choose between those two, which one would you choose?
I would go Oceanic. Yep.
My answer depends on the day.
That's fair enough.
And with Sun, I'll give you two different ones: Black Altar and Monoliths. Monoliths in Dimension, to me, precisely.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good one. I would probably say Monoliths. Yep.
Would you agree that that is maybe their most accessible one?
That's fun. It's funny to use the word accessible with Sun.
Apart from the live records, because I think the latest live record that made a veil that was even more accessible. But
possibly, yeah. I mean, I think, yeah, I like Monolith. I think I have just I didn't love the Black album at all. I thought it was okay. I just think I didn't really get into the vocals on it that much. With Zasta. It sort of it was too it referenced black metal too much for me. I think it made it was a record. For me, that's their only album they've done, which I think is connecting to a genre in some way. And I think they are their own genre outside that album. Like everything that was completely unique. So, and that's just a personal opinion. But I was in Seattle for a lot of the recording of Monoliths. Maybe that's part of my connection to it as well. So,
yeah, probably. And still, that is a very good explanation. I would also do that. So now two questions for the expat. What would you rather put on your toast, Marmite or peanut butter?
Vegemite.
Vegemite, okay.
But if I was to answer your question truthfully, and I don't despise Marmite at all as much as there's often the battle between Australians and the British about Vegemite and Marmite, I would choose Marmite over peanut butter. Definitely.
And I'm not sure if you are a sports fan, but if you could go to a football match, would it rather be American football or Aussie football?
Oh, Aussie football, come on. I hate American football. That's my hate comment.
Yeah, I mean, like living in the city where you are living, like not having had any success for 10 years, I would also say.
I haven't watched a game of American football since probably 2009. Yeah, I don't like it. Yeah, everyone just stands around doing nothing and they're dancing. I don't see the point of it whatsoever. Hate it.
But are you like a sports fan? Do you watch sports?
No. It's a funny question you should ask. I don't take any notice of sports, but I am a rabid follower of Australian football. Yes, I subscribe to a streaming service. I do fantasy football for Australian rules. It's the only sport I like. I don't take any other notice of sport.
Yeah. So, but then you probably also have like a favorite team, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Which one?
They're called Richmond Tigers.
But they're not in Melbourne, are they?
They're in Melbourne, yeah. Most of the teams are from Melbourne, actually. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Last one, and that, of course, I cannot end this interview without talking about visual art. And I've already said that, like, I've noticed a lot of your oeuvre and body of work in my record collection. And also I have some of the posters downstairs in the man cave. Whenever people ask me like for important illustrators, artwork illustrators, of your name drops, and I have two more, Kozik and Hess. Which one would you choose? Derek Hess or Frank Kozik?
That's a funny one. I can't answer it quickly. I think I have a tendency to lean towards Hess. Mostly, it's not because I've grown to like Kozik's work a lot more in recent years. And it's funny you should say this, because one of the reasons I started doing my tour posters the way I did back in the early 2000s was a reaction to Frank Kozik's work. I hated it. I didn't like I felt it was too cartoony in a sense, and that was sort of part of that 90s poster style with Coop and all those guys. They were doing those flat color screen prints with the, you know, the sort of comic book sort of style, and the demon head, the demon horns and whatever. I just found it corny. I don't know. I was just an angry young man. There was no real reason for me to hate it that much. But as I've got a little older, I have a huge appreciation for Frank Kozik's work. I think it's amazing. So if it was now, I think I would say Kozik, because I loved Hess for a long time. But I think one of my issues with Derek Hess's work over time is it's very, very similar.
Yeah.
All the time. It's very, very similar.
Yeah.
And so I guess I find it boring, but I have extraordinary admiration for his skill and his, you know, his talent as an artist is amazing. I very much respect it. But I think, it's like a dead heat just because of the history with those two. I can't really pick one, but I prefer Kozik's work now. If I was
Would you agree that, like, Kozik has like this cartoonish thing? But would you agree that the thing about Hess is the way that he uses ink?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I loved Hess's work for a long time. I mean, I used to kind of not that I ever did it in my professional work, but I'd often sort of mimic Derek Hess's work, just doodling at home. I just loved the way he did all those crazy lines with the figure, and it was the way it would just sort of unwind, and so I thought it was amazing. But I think just as a person, you know, now in my 50s, looking back on it, I just find he's done the same poster over and over again. In some ways, yeah.
I'm like, there is even something that I would call the Hess figure, because it's very often head down, arms stretched, and a lot of emphasis on the shoulder regions.
Yeah. And it gives off the same.
Did it perfectly, right?
Yeah. But he also, like, I think with Hess's work, it over time, it's like it might as well just be for the same band, because it's giving off the same vibe, the same concept, the same atmosphere, that sort of uncomfortable, tense angst of the human body, and that's the same concept throughout. And I think, I mean, that's obviously what he likes to do, and that's fair enough. I can't criticize it, but asking me that question,
And the thing is, I mean, like, we gotta agree that both of them, because of their very clearly identifiable style, are clearly recognizable. More recognizable than yours.
No, yeah, for sure.
But, and that's also what I want to end with, for all the people out there, take your time and look up some of his work, Seldon's work here. It's very differentiated, it's very different, it's very diverse compared to the other two guys that we mentioned. So take your time and look up some of the records. You can go to Discogs and find a list of, like, I think 140 of covers that you did. You can also find a lot of the posters online. So take your time and do that, because I think the man here deserves a little bit more credit nowadays. And if you like his work, he'd still be up to do something. Remember,
I'm around. I'm available.
Otherwise, he's only making pizza and bread, like.
Yeah, I'm good at that too.
Yeah. We could have a bake-off.
That sounds like a plan.
Yeah, when you come to Europe. So, Seldon, enjoy the rest of your evening and watch some Aussie football for us.
I will, Torsten. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye. Talk soon.
Okay, see ya.